University. I'm here this morning with Fred Cate, Vice President for Research at IU. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 related research and how IU researchers are having an impact on the virus and its spread. We're going to take your questions about COVID-19 guidance for research operations at IU. We'll talk about research protocols to comply with university policies, state law, and CDC guidelines. We'll also touch on how IU is helping faculty, staff, and students manage their ongoing research activities. And before I turn it over to Fred, I just want to say to everyone who's tuning in, we hope you're staying healthy and safe. We've had to make a lot of tough decisions at Indiana University this semester to really try to protect the health and well-being of everyone in the IU family. And we know that the impacts have been massive on what we expected this semester to be. So we really hope everyone is just washing your hands a lot, maintaining physical distance, avoiding gatherings, and really doing everything we can to get this outbreak under control so that we can get things back to normal. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Fred. And the first question that I want to lead off with is for you, Fred. How can you describe, or how would you describe how the COVID-19 outbreak has impacted research at IU?
Well, thanks very much, Clayton, and thanks for having me. It's obviously impacted research a lot, although maybe not quite as much as some people would think. So we are, of course, in compliance with the governor's executive order, are following an essential research policy. But we've defined essential research, as the governor has encouraged us to do, quite broadly. And so this includes obviously research relating to life-saving therapies. It also includes research on a wide variety of COVID-19 related topics. So not just developing a vaccine or important things like that, but also understanding how people are dealing with it, how we're dealing with food insecurity, how we're dealing with energy insecurity, how people on all parts of the economic spectrum are dealing with COVID-19. We also are continuing our work where we're doing animal research, because again, those animals are a critical part of a lot of our medical research studies. And those animals are here, they're alive, they're being used for research today. And it would be frankly immoral to simply say we're going to stop, and then we would either have to euthanize those animals, which we would not want to do, and some universities have, but we have not, or we would otherwise just have to let them live out their natural lives and then die without ever having served the research purpose that could actually help the public. So although we've seen a significant reduction in research, we still have a great deal of research going on. Much of it can be done remotely, just like we're talking now. And also we're seeing research being done on campus where it can be done in full compliance with CDC guidelines, namely the social separation, and where social separation is not possible, the use of face masks and gloves and other things to protect against transmitting the disease.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. So first question, they're already starting to come in. Morgan asks, and this is, I guess, related to, we mentioned that we're going to be discussing cybersecurity. So Morgan asks, I shop online a lot. Is there a bigger threat now to my credit card now that everyone is doing more online activities?
Okay, so great question for Morgan. And let me say it's going to be sort of a long answer. The short answer is probably no, but it's a bigger answer than that. So as you know, we're all living online now. We're doing everything online. We're working, we're socializing, we're buying, we're doing everything online. And so it's not that it's necessarily a greater risk, it's that there's a greater impact if something goes wrong. If you suffer a cybersecurity attack and suddenly your computer won't work, or you have ransomware or something like that happens, the impact in your life is going to be bigger, and getting it fixed is going to be harder when it's harder to get, do you want someone to come to your home to work on your computer? Now, having said that, the specific question from Morgan's about your credit card, and credit cards are actually pretty safe in this country because Congress has said you will not be liable for the misuse of your credit card, provided you report any misuse that you detect within 60 days. And so I encourage people to use credit cards online. I use them online all the time. It's worthwhile being vigilant. I've set up my credit card account so that it tells me if something's happening that's unusual, a big purchase or an abnormal purchase. But it's as safe as it's ever been to use a credit card online. But again, I don't want that to obscure the bigger message that this is really a time for really serious vigilance about what we're doing online, including particularly attention to those phishing messages. We've seen a real uptick in phishing. Lots of those messages we've seen at the university. Almost every dean has had phishing messages go out in their name that say, hey, I need to talk to you. Could you send me your cell phone number? But if you look, it's actually not come from their university email account. It's come from a Gmail or some other account. And so it's really pays, no matter how desperate we are for human contact by internet, to just take a moment, make sure you read the email carefully, look for those telltale signs like typos or the wrong email address or an unusual and out of sequence type of request. And then, there always is that option of just not responding or pick up the phone and call. If it's really important, I promise you they will come back.
That's right. It's really good advice. I would also say that for IU employees who are tuning in, you can always report phishing to phishing.iu.edu and definitely be vigilant. And that kind of leads into Kara's question. So in addition to the phishing scams, Kara's asking, what other cybersecurity or what trends from criminals and hackers are you seeing during this time? I guess we talked about the phishing scams, but are there other things and other security risks that people should be on guard for right now?
Well, I think in general, we as always see an uptick in attacks whenever anything serious or bad happens. So if there's a hurricane, we will suddenly see lots of fake FEMA sites, or we'll see lots of organizations pop up that claim to be offering assistance and ask you to give money to them, but they're not. And I don't want to dismiss these, but this is just fraud. Fraud goes on all the time. It goes on a lot online. And it's that a thing we learned in kindergarten. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So we're seeing fraud around masks. We're seeing fraud around other types of protective gear, hand sanitizer, people offering things for sale, either where they are devious about how they describe it. Like the moment you see hand sanitizer for sale that's all natural, you probably have a problem, because we need alcohol in that hand sanitizer to work. And that alcohol is rarely going to occur in nature. You're going to need that made in a machine, because you need 60% or 70% alcohol to make a difference. So sometimes it's just that type of devious behavior. Sometimes it's outright fraud. And for example, we've seen ransomware attacks on hospitals. We've seen attack on Health and Human Services early in the COVID-19 outbreak. The good news is most of these are beaten off. Again, these institutions are pretty good with their cybersecurity. The key issue here to me seems to be that since we're all working from home now, we need to be as vigilant at home as we were in the office. And so even if you thought, like, I don't really worry about my home laptop, I don't really worry about this, maybe I share it with my kids, this is not a time to be lax about that. Again, not just because the risk may be greater, but because the consequences of being compromised would be so much greater.
All right, great. So Mara asks, what type of online activities could put me most at risk?
Basically, whenever you are clicking on or visiting something somewhere that you have never been before and that's out of the norm. So for example, if you're on a CNN website and you click on a CNN story, there's some risk, but very little. That wouldn't worry me at all. But I keep getting those emails, as I'm sure everyone is getting, that say, hey, I saw this interesting thing, click on it, or here's something that will brighten your day, or look at this. And typically they're forwarded. So I may know who sent it to me, but I don't know who sent it to them. And then you look at the place they're trying to send you and you're like, I've never even heard of this. This isn't like WashingtonPost.com. This is some site I've never heard of. And that's when, again, you got to make your own judgments. Mine is, I can wait. If it's really that good, someone's going to send it again, or someone's going to send it who I know or I trust. And I'm going to have a better way of sort of verifying it. Another thing you can do is, if you use your mouse, if you're using a device that has a mouse, or if you use if you hover over a web address, you can see the actual address you're going to. There's nothing that says the web address you see has to be the web address where you're being sent. And that's a great way, because if they're saying one thing, but they're sending you somewhere else, that's a pretty good reason to say, wait a minute, I just want to be careful about this. Again, sometimes there are reasons for that, like they may have shortened the address, so they say go here, and here is the highlighted word. Well, obviously the web address is going to be different than here. But if they say go to www.cnn.com, but when you hover over it, it's something completely different, that's probably reason, again, to be hesitant, to be careful. So clicking on things, going places where you've never been. And then again, I would still be very careful about online donations, about places where you pay money, you give your credit card, you use your PayPal account, again, that are abnormal. So doing it on Amazon, you do it on Amazon all day, every day. Doing it on, the online shopping tools for groceries or things like that, I would be much less hesitant. But where you suddenly are doing something completely different, you're giving to a charity you've never heard of because somebody told you it was a good charity, and you can check it out. Those are pretty easy to verify. Is that a real charity? Is it a worthwhile cause? Do they give the money that you give them to worthy causes?
That's great. And a good reminder always just to take a few extra seconds to hover over those links, make sure that they say that they are, that they make sense, or that it's coming from a trusted source. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we are live right now taking your questions about research, about COVID-19 and how the outbreak has affected research at Indiana University. We're speaking with Fred Cate. He is the Vice President for Research here at IU. If you have questions about any of those topics, about how IU researchers are working on COVID or how this outbreak is affecting research operations here, please drop them in the comments and we will try to get to those. So to kind of bring it back to the COVID topic, Morgan again asks, what have IU researchers been doing in relation to COVID? Are there vaccines in the works?
Yes, is the easy answer to that question. So we are both engaged working with companies doing tests of vaccines. We have research labs that are working to develop vaccines using all sorts of different approaches, sometimes using approaches for vaccines that have worked in one setting, and we're trying to see if those could be adapted to this setting. And particularly looking there, we have a research project looking at pediatric vaccines to see if we could come up with a vaccine for children and COVID-19. We're doing genetic work on vaccines. So if you look for the genetic code that makes up COVID-19, if we can replicate small bits of that and therefore help your body respond to that by generating, without having to actually give you any risk of getting COVID-19, that would be a novel and really quite important approach to developing vaccines. And then we have modelers, people who do work in computers and informatics, who are building digital versions of human tissues so that we can watch how COVID acts on them without having to use real people, without ever having to do this with a human. And that way, if you have a good model, if you have a model that works effectively and really works the same way, for example, human lung tissue works, you could then use that digital model to test digital approaches, like developing a vaccine digitally, see if it works in the model, then move on to human testing or lab testing if it works there. And so one of the things we know is in all of the vaccines being developed around the world, and there are lots of efforts underway, many at IU, computers have played a really important role here because they're helping us narrow down the likely tools that will work best. And this is going to be key because getting to a vaccine eventually will not be nearly as good as getting to a vaccine soon.
That is fascinating stuff. The modeling about human tissue, I had no idea. That is really amazing. So this question has come up a couple of times. Both Rachel and Tyler have asked in response to questions about security and privacy. Are there any types of security tools or privacy tools that I should invest in? And I don't think they mean to invest in, but I think use.
Well, you mean invest in both ways. So I mean, of course,
we're not touting anybody's IPO here today in this particular broadcast.
Exactly. Yes, of course there are. So let me just say, and Clayton, you've already made this point, but I think it's such an important point. I just want to echo it. Patience is probably the best privacy and security tool. just think before you click. Just think before you do it. And I know exactly what this temptation is like to just rush on, particularly when like you're on a long, boring Zoom call with like 25 people. So you're checking your email or you're doing other things while this is going on, yet you're trying to listen. And then you find you're suddenly clicking on things, doing things. Last night, I deleted a file that I didn't mean to delete because I just wasn't paying enough attention because I was also on a Zoom call while it was happening. So patience, focus, it can wait before you click on that attachment, or it can wait before you visit that website until you could give it your full attention. Microsoft provides a free Microsoft Defender product, which again, provides very good basic protection. I'm not endorsing Microsoft, but since you can get it for free and it comes from a reputable source, that's a good one. There are lots of commercial tools that provide excellent protection against viruses. I don't spend my life examining these and comparing them in detail, but you can easily find places that do. PC Magazine, if you go to pcmag.com, they do an annual review of antivirus softwares. You'll find there's always two or three that are editor's choices, or CNET does annual reviews, and those are very useful to look at. The great thing about a good antivirus software is it can protect you from a lot of things. Like it can check your email to see if your email contains viruses. It can check attachments before you open it. So if you're using one of those, and only if you're using it, it's not good enough just to have downloaded it or just to have had it on the computer when you bought it. Most computers come with like a 90-day trial, but then if you didn't give them a credit card number, it don't. And so it's not, you got to actually be an active user. But then if you click on something that's malicious, it'll block it. It'll say, wait a minute, are you sure you know what you're doing? This looks pretty suspicious. And so using good antivirus software, good passwords cost you nothing. And again, this is a pretty good time maybe to update those, to take advantage of some of that extra time we have at home right now, screen time, to say, maybe I want to change those passwords that I've used for years and years and years. Be careful as you think about privacy. Remember, for example, when you're on a Zoom call, I was on with someone quite recently, and her glasses were reflecting everything in her screen just perfectly. So I could see whatever she was doing, even though she didn't mean for me to see it, obviously. And so remember that just because we feel like we're in the privacy of our home and we have digital backgrounds and so forth, they're not foolproof. And so you want to be careful that you're not revealing information. Even things like if you dial into a Zoom call, for example, you're going to reveal the number you're dialing from unless you block that. Well, if you protect your cell phone number, if you have a protective order against a abusive former spouse, or if you've got other reasons you don't want that number made public, you want to change that setting in Zoom before you call in, because otherwise you're going to be revealing that information. Or call in from a different phone. You can order a cheap, inexpensive, disposable cellular phone and use that rather than use your phone that you use every day. And you may, but again, these are just all things about using a little common sense and being careful. I even remind people about like mirrors in their room when they're doing Zoom, or windows. What else are they seeing? Can you see down the hall and see what's going on in another room? Privacy is precious to all of us, and it's actually not that hard to protect in many settings. It just requires a little bit of thought.
That's great. So switching gears again a little bit, Jennifer asks, Jennifer is asking if there is any plans, if you know of any plans for research around how the shelter at home quarantine is affecting mental health, and looking at how people adjust or react to the quarantine time sort of in the future. Are you aware of IU researchers that are looking into this type of stuff?
I am, and looking at mental health generally, but also looking at mental health of people who might have other things that could exacerbate mental health conditions, like addictions or depressive conditions, or things like this, where they might be on medicine. Suddenly it's harder for them to get medical assistance. So we're looking at that broadly. Researchers across the university are, and I think this is really raises an important point, and that is that COVID-19 is affecting us in all sorts of ways. I mean, our economy's in right now, a serious slump. Many people have watched their investments decline. Lots of people are gaining weight because we're suddenly all working at home where we can eat anytime we want. Exercise is more challenging. You can't go to a gym anymore. You were talking earlier about your kids can't go to a playground. Um, Family tensions are undoubtedly escalating, at least in most families, in normal families, that inevitably would somehow help reduce those tensions by getting the kids out of the house for a few hours every day, or by getting to work and away from your spouse. And suddenly you're all together. And so we have researchers looking at pretty much all of these issues and looking at the policy side. What are the things that that the governor and the president and the CDC are doing? How effective are these? Are they being communicated well? And again, there have been a lot of news reports really quite gripping about the way in which COVID-19 is affecting families in very individual ways. Many families, that are less well off find it much harder to shelter in place. They have less space. They have, if you're sharing an apartment, a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 or 3 kids, you're in a totally different situation than if you're sharing a 4-bedroom house with 2 or 3 kids. And we, while understandably, the policies have generally been rolled out in ways that ignore those differences, as they are rolled back, as COVID-19 reduces its impact, and we see some lessening of some of these restrictions. One of the things we're trying to do is provide research to help guide policymakers so that they can reduce the most critical places where it's having the most serious unintended negative consequences first. And then we also do a lot of work here on modeling the outbreak of COVID-19, modeling the prevalence of COVID-19. You can go to research.impact.iu.edu, and there, under coronavirus, we have a list. You can visit many of the models that have been created to see, even on a county by county basis. It just gives you as much knowledge in judging your own actions, your own decisions. So for example, if we're headed into a peak, I have a good friend who, said he told his kids last week, if you've got to go to the grocery, go now, because for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be a much higher intensity. This was in Marion County, of COVID-19, and it will be less safe to be out. And so, we're trying not just to study things for, if you will, the next time, which is unfortunately probably inevitable, and we want to be better prepared, but we're also trying to provide useful help and advice for this time, so that not only policymakers, but also individuals are in a better position to deal with these enormous challenges.
And I think that's really important stuff. People, of course, are really concerned about whether being outside is going to be, negatively impact their health or put them at risk. So super useful. Another question, Kara asks, how could the COVID outbreak potentially affect election security in November?
Well, ironically, it may increase election security. So one of the things we know is all of the kind of blue ribbon task forces that have looked at election security, including the one from the National Academy of Sciences, which IU's president, Michael McRobbie, chaired, all have recommended that the best way to run a really secure election is have paper, either paper as your actual ballot or paper as your backup ballot. So that if there's a question about electronic counting or electronic voting, you've always got a paper record to go back to. Well, if, for example, we end up voting by mail, which would be one way to do much more secure in terms of COVID-19 safe voting, we would all have paper ballots. There would be a paper record for everything. And just like with the census, which has, we've all gotten those census forms saying you need to log on, or you need to call in, or you need to do something to respond to this, and there's a unique identifier on every one, they're pretty good at making sure that only one response per unique identifier is being recorded, because otherwise the census would be useless. If I could register myself 3 or 4 times and thereby make my county look bigger than it is, that would defeat the whole purpose of the census. And so my guess is we could imagine a more secure election system. It might be slower. We're not going to have election night results. It would be very different. But let me say, having said that, anytime you put stress on a system, you increase the risk that something can go wrong. And COVID-19 is certainly stressing a lot of systems, and that would certainly include our voting systems.
Thank you. Charlie asks, and this is kind of similar in theme, Charlie's question is, has the university experienced an increase in state-sponsored activity or probing of critical research and security infrastructure?
You know, that's a great question, and I honestly just don't know the answer. We do track that. I mean, we pay very close attention to it, and we haven't in any way reduced our tracking of that. I just don't know it. We typically get monthly updates on that, and we just haven't had an update since this work from home situation started. Have me back, and I'll bring that data with me.
Okay, we'll absolutely do it. So I want to pivot a little bit to other sort of research and what the university, I just want to hear from you what the university has been doing to support other types of research that might not be able to be, done in person right now. Can you speak a little bit to that? Not only for current faculty, but also we have a lot of student researchers. So what has kind of been done to support that ongoing research during this time?
So most of the research the university does, and I want to be clear in my terms here, I'm not talking about most of the money that we get for doing research, but most of the research that faculty and staff and students do is actually research that does not require a lab or doesn't require a facility. It's research that can be done with the internet anywhere, or research that can be done with telephone surveys, or research that can be done with tools that are perfectly alive and working right now. And so that research is continuing. We're continuing to support it. The only places where we have stopped supporting research is where the research can't be done in the current environment. So for example, if you were applying for a research travel fellowship to go to a library in another country to work for a month, well, you can't travel right now, and they wouldn't let you in that country anyway. So we're not providing funding right now for things that can't be done. Or if you want to host a big conference, well, right now, we can't have in-person conferences. And so we're not supporting those activities. And instead, we've turned that money to support money that either can be done in the current environment, or that can be done remotely, or that is COVID related or otherwise addresses a critical need facing society. And in which case we're not only providing funding, but we're also making sure we're providing the protective equipment and so forth, so that these things are being done in a safe and secure environment. In this, it's important. Research is needed now more than ever. I mean, the last thing you want to do is go into a pandemic and stop researching. And one of the things for which I think the federal government deserves credit is the amount of additional funding it's put into research in the various coronavirus stimulus bills that have passed. We've seen more money available to the NIH and the NSF and to other federal agencies to support research. And of course, we're actively competing for that money. I think the challenge is going to be as we think about how long we have to go with students on campus, because students are such a critical part of research. And even though students can do a lot of their own research remotely, some research is really, you just need a lab. I mean, there's nothing around it. You need a lab, nothing else will do. And how do we get those researchers back in a situation where they can do that research so that they don't lose progress towards their degree or lose progress towards whatever is next for them? It's an issue we're working on as aggressively as we can. And as soon as we see the governor begin to reduce some of the restrictions in the executive order, we'll be able to roll out more plans, again, very carefully and with enormous attention to not allowing a flare-up of COVID-19, but to get those students back where they can do the research that they need to do.
Wonderful. Marissa asks, Marissa's interested or wants to know if there's any research-backed trusted designs for making homemade masks. There's lots of variations out there, and I'm wondering for an ongoing IU Bloomington School of Public Health mask drive.
And in fact, again, you can go to, we publish a weekly research impact newsletter, and those are all, you can find all that information at research.impact.iu.edu, including about one of our really remarkably creative researchers who has developed a paper-based origami mask that, particularly if you make it out of a filtrate paper, the sort of thing you would find in an air conditioning filter or something like that, filters as much, I mean, it appears to, if the product claims are accurate, as an N95 mask does. And you can make the shape so that it fits your face tightly. So there's that type of work. We also are doing work on how you can reuse masks. In other words, how do you clean a mask? How do you sterilize a mask so that you can use it again? And again, as that work either becomes available or has results that we can make public, that will all be on that same website. Let me just say, it's important to remember right now that the recommendation of the CDC that people cover their face doesn't really require a mask of any form. I mean, a scarf would work. Anything that will just, the whole goal here is not to keep you from breathing in coronavirus. It's in case you have coronavirus and don't know it. It's to keep you from breathing it out in the droplets that might be in your breath. And so it doesn't have to be a perfect mask. It doesn't have to be an N95. It doesn't have to have a surgical seal on your face. It's just merely meant to be a block between you and the rest of the world.
That's a good point. As you mentioned, all of this information you can find at research.iu.edu. That and the origami mask video we have put links to in the comments. So any of those you can go through and check out if you're just tuning in. We're speaking with Fred Cate, Vice President for Research here at Indiana University, and we're talking about how the COVID-19 outbreak has impacted research at the university. We're taking your questions, so please drop your questions in the comments and we will try to get to them. So another question that has come in, very, very interesting question. Jonathan asks, are there any research infrastructure projects being moved forward to take advantage of the empty campuses?
It's a great question, and I don't know what the answer is. In other words, I'm not aware of any, but I hesitate to say no, because even though I'm vice president for research, we have thousands of researchers who are often doing things that I only know about if they either go wrong or they require a lot of money. So I do know, for example, we've had some drone photography done over the campus because it's one of the unusual times we can get pictures of the campus without people on it. And so if we're wanting to do things for which we need a clear, clean image, this is a remarkable time to get it. I don't know what else we're doing that takes advantage of the fact that at this moment we have far fewer people on our campuses. But it's a great question, and I will actually follow up just for my own interest.
Right. I certainly know that our team of photographers are maintaining physical distance, but also making sure to take advantage of the empty campus right now and getting some shots, not unlike your digital background there. Mindy also reminds us that wearing a mask also helps to remind you not to touch your face while you're out, which is certainly very helpful. Let's see. There are, so what additional efforts and expertise are IU researchers bringing to bear on this fight? I know we've talked a little bit about some of the COVID medical research and some of the mental health stuff, but what additional efforts and experts are being leveraged in this situation?
So again, there's hardly a department that hasn't been affected in what it's doing research-wise by this. But we see a lot of activity coming out of our School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering, which has been working. I mentioned earlier about the use of technology to help either model tissue or to help identify possible candidates for vaccines. They've also been doing a lot of work on helping to visualize what's going on. In other words, a bunch of data is really hard to take in, but if you can see a map or you can have a dashboard, that makes it much easier for policymakers or for people who are having to make decisions about companies or organizations and what they should be doing. A lot of data visualization work. We have 3D printing facilities that are being used to 3D print various forms of protective wear, including some face shields for people who are in medical settings where they need to not be splashed with things if they're using water or something with a patient. We have other researchers doing doing work on understanding the social media impacts of all of this. In other words, right now it looks like about half of everything on social media about COVID-19 is false. And this is a problem because we're all communicating by social media. We're really using that. And we're trying to figure out how, first of all, why that is. And second of all, why is it that false things seem to propagate faster than true information? And are there ways that you could intervene, again, consistent with the First Amendment and, you know, protecting an open flow of expression? But when things are factually wrong, are there ways to get them either corrected or reduce the frequency with which they're spread? We're looking at the effect of communications coming out from the White House and the governor and you know, other places, and the ways in which people are internalizing that. Are people getting panicked, or do people take in the facts and act rationally according to them? So again, lots of activities right now around data modeling, data communications, even things like this. How does this work? Right now, we're examining the effectiveness of online education. I mean, as you well know, IU's been doing online education almost as long as there's been a World Wide Web. And so for decades, we're not new to this. We've had hundreds of degrees that were available online well before there was COVID-19. But we've never been in a situation where everybody was online. And so, you know, what you have to assume is that before, courses that were online were those that were obviously good to put online. In fact, there were often benefits to have it online. You could convey the information better. What about courses that weren't early candidates for going online? How are those working? And we're testing that right now. In fact, we have a pilot project going on that's working with students to determine what they are getting out of the course and how that compares with what they were getting out of in-person courses. Because again, online education is here to stay. We won't all be doing it forever, but we could learn a lot out of this sort of massive unplanned experiment where suddenly everything had to go online. So there's lots of activity around around things like that. And then, as I mentioned, lots of what you might think of as social science research, looking at how this is affecting people, how it's affecting the economy, how it's affecting those who are poorer. Does it have a disproportionate impact on ethnic minorities? What about racial minorities? What is the impact? Do we see a distinct impact there? Are there particular challenges in the way, for example, that different school districts are dealing with this? We have research on this. You know, lots of school districts have more money, but lots of school districts have very few resources, and they weren't really prepared to go online. Not every student had a laptop or had an iPad. And so we're trying to look at those disparities to figure out how big of a difference it's making. So really, you'd be hard pressed, I think, as you look across the breadth of the university, to find an area in which we're not doing research on how that area is affected by COVID-19.
It really is a full team effort across all the departments and different schools. Another question, this is interesting. So how do you think the stay-at-home order will affect the climate in Indiana? Do you think we'll see changes related to that after the stay-at-home order?
Yeah, so let me say I'm not a climate scientist, but I think we see it already. In other words, we and many others measure pollution all the time in many different settings, and it's way down. And having far fewer cars on the road, having some factories that are shuttered, even with the enormous economic impact of that, the environmental impact's been quite significant. And it's funny. I mean, I've heard many people remark, even if you just look outside, it feels like spring is happening in a almost different way in the absence of having so many humans in the way. People have commented they've seen more birds, they've seen more animal life, because of course there's far fewer people out interfering or affecting that. Now, of course, not everything has gone away, and there are also very significant interaction challenges. So, for example, we're using a lot less gasoline. Gas prices are lower than they've ever been. I saw a gas price the other day for unleaded for $1.55, and I took a picture of it through my car window because I thought, literally, I may never again see that. Like, this may be a once in a lifetime thing. But of course, that has serious economic impacts. It means that people who work in the industry related to petroleum refining are hurting a lot. And so again, part of what we have to learn from this is how do we get the benefits without having such great costs.
And that really brings up another point that I wanted to make sure to ask you about is, can you speak to any ongoing research or planned research that's really aimed at or impacting jobs and work currently in the state?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at everything from actually understanding the impact. How is unemployment spread? Is it worse in some areas than others? I mean, the answer is yes. You don't need a lot of research to tell you that. I think what we're also going to see is the longer term impact. In other words, as you know, we've seen significant help from Congress and major small business assistance. We've also seen organizations like the university, that said, look, we're going to cover all salaries through the end of this fiscal year, through the end of June. But the bigger question is going to be what happens next. If we don't have a vaccine for, say, another year, and remember, you don't have to just have it in a test tube. You actually have to have people getting it in large numbers. And so that's going to take time. And so what we're really doing now is trying to look not so much at the economic upheaval today, but predicting and trying to think of ways to ameliorate the economic upheaval of, say, the year ahead. And some of that obviously means more investment. You already see calls in Congress, for example, to add $200 or $250 billion to the Small Business Investment Fund, but also trying to work collaboratively with the state and with industry and with others on ways, again, to reduce what could be the negative impact. And we've seen a lot of that. So we've seen, Vera Bradley in Indiana is now making masks. And so if the market for their other products was declining, and that might have put people out of work, the market for masks is alive and well. And so, we've seen people shifting. We've seen, Amazon hiring more people. We've seen grocery stores hiring more people. And so it's not just that we're seeing economic recession or depression, it's that we're seeing economic shifts. We're seeing movements, and trying to understand those movements and to think about their long-term consequences are precisely the types of things that researchers in the business school and in our economics departments are looking at.
I wanted to circle back on something that you mentioned a little bit earlier about helping people connect with accurate information that's come online, or sorting through accurate information online. And I know that we have some IU researchers who really specialize in that. Can you talk about a little bit more about what they're doing? They've been in the news a little bit and what they've been doing recently to really help people find clear, useful, accurate information.
Right. So frankly, we're doing everything that you could really imagine. So think of it as a spectrum. So one thing is we're putting out accurate, clear information. And we have some of our reporters who are working on other projects have now been moved into this to help bring out clear, useful information that people can rely on, and we can have predictable distribution cycles so they know what they're going to get. We're doing things where we're looking at social media in particular. We have a large project that's a joint initiative of our School of Informatics, Computing Engineering, and our School of Communications that's working together on a social observatory that's actually looking at social media, looking at postings. It can track misinformation as it moves. And we're trying to build tools that help identify things as likely to be false or likely to be true, that help signal to the user, to you and me, so that we have a better sense of what are sources that are more likely to provide accurate information or more likely to provide inaccurate information. We've seen a lot of activity where various press organizations are critiquing statements, especially statements made by public officials, to say, look, how does this, they're comparing them, when two officials say things that differ. And again, we're trying to figure out how that impacts the public. Does that just cause us to tune out when two sources disagree? Or are we, do we have the tools we need to say, okay, I can evaluate this argument and say, I think this is the right answer here. So part of what has struck me about this is the breadth of the activity, because again, we're getting our information in kind of an unusual way. I mean, we've never really had a time in modern history in which people were not getting information face to face, but instead are getting it almost exclusively through the internet in one form or another, whether that's mass media through the internet or social media or Facebook or other types of tools. And so it's not only a place where I think research can and is making a difference, but it's also a place where it's a great research opportunity. Let's just be clear. I mean, if somebody, come forward and said, look, I have an idea for a study, let's put 4 billion people online and let's see what happens if they have to live their lives online. I don't think that would have gotten approved, and it certainly would not have gotten funded. But now that's what they've got, and so they're taking advantage of it.
All right, so we are right at about 10:15, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Folks, if you're just tuning in, we have been speaking with Fred Cate. He's the Vice President of Research here at Indiana University. We've got a lot of great resources in the comments that you can check out, links out to articles, to websites that have way more information than we discussed here about what IU is doing broadly in terms of research and very specifically. Fred, I want to turn it over to you here. Just any closing thoughts, what you would tell people about what Indiana University Research is doing right now to help us get through this.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this is a pretty important time to remember. We often think about the fact that the state has public universities in terms of the education we provide, and that's extremely important. We're continuing to provide that, but we also provide an enormous research capacity, and never has that research capacity been needed more than now, and never has it been more important that it be focused on the public interest. And I think that is something really that we can all be proud of, certainly people at IU, but certainly people around the state and around the country who pay for that research, whether you pay for it directly or whether you pay for it indirectly through tax dollars that then fund the NIH or the NSF or others who are helping to pay for it. And that it's hard to exaggerate. I mean, the only thing worse than a really tragedy like COVID-19 would be to not take advantage of a tragedy like COVID-19, to learn from it, to try to bring the best minds and the best technology to bear on it, to try to reduce its impact as much as possible, and to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes in the future, or that we're better prepared in the future. And I've been really overwhelmed as an administrator by the number of faculty, staff, and students who have come forward with incredibly creative ideas for what they could do, for ways they could totally change what they were working on to something that would serve that broader public interest. And I think it's a time to actually be pretty proud of our public universities.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for answering all of these questions. I'm sure it's been really helpful for our viewers. And with that, we're going to go ahead and end this live stream. We've been speaking with Fred Cate, Vice President for Research at Indiana University. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you.